Hi guys. So this is my second video posting for Linguistics 3200, and I am obviously here to talk about my experience in the classroom. Some of the things, so what I want to start with are just some of the things that I did within the classroom to help the teacher with her students and just to keep the class organized. So I did a lot of observing. Actually, I'd sit down at tables with kids as they do different rotations, and I'd sit and listen to them talk to each other. I think that just listening to the conversations that they were having was really interesting because that's when you got to see, how they actually spoke and how they conversed with each other and just the, different use of their language and, whatever else. And to the little girls that I worked with, I spoke about them in the last video. When they would talk to each other, they would use a lot of Spanglish. They'd go on back and forth between English and Spanish, and it was interesting for me to see. Some of the other things that I did a lot of sight word practice with them, and although they're supposed to know the sight words just from seeing them, hence the term sight word, they still had to sound them out because they, even though they practice them all the time, it's almost like a guessing game for these students. They'd see a W, and the first thing that would come to their mind is the word what, when it was really the word where. So I'd have to remind them to sound the word out. And but again, they're supposed to know these words right when they see them because they're a sight word. And so sometimes what I would do is I would take a group of students into like a resource room kind of area where I can sit with them and pull up different sight words and have them say the word and then use it in a sentence, which was huge. It is huge with English language learners because this is how you are able to see, okay, you don't only know the word when you see it, but you're able to take it and use it in, in a sentence, and you actually know what this word means. And a lot of the time they had a lot of trouble with it because they'd see a word and, it'd be like, what? And they would say like, what is my dog doing? Is he, is he doing, I don't know. They would come up with the most random sentences. I can't even begin to think of what they would say. But, so yeah, so that was interesting. Another thing that I would do is I would take individual students and I would take them into, again, like a resource room, and we'd sit down and we'd do sight words and do sentences. And some of the other things that I would do is with some of the English language learners, I would take them with their work, whether it was math or writing or whatever else, and I would take them into another room and we'd sit and we'd work together. And that for me was awesome, especially for this field experience, because again, I got to listen to them. We'd converse and we'd talk, and I was able to see the difference with English language learners and native English speakers. So what the teacher would have me do is she would, for the first half of the class, first like hour of the class, she would have me take an English language learner, and then the second person I would take was a native English learner. So I was able to see the difference, which I thought was, again, very helpful for this field experience because we're trying to see, how they develop language and, what's the difference. And with different languages, they say things differently. They switch words, and it was awesome. Another thing that I did was they would do rotations in the classroom, and they would go and sit at one table. About 4 students would go sit at one table, and they would do some art with maybe some writing, and just very integrated, a lot of integrated curriculum in the classroom setting. So a lot of like art with writing, or they would do their numbers or, whatever else. And again, I'd sit with them and I would talk to them, and I was helping, but I was also, observing a lot. I got to hear them again talk with their classmates, and that's the best. I felt like that was the best way to actually see just, the phonology and the morphology and everything. It was really interesting. Some of the other things that I would do for her is just help kids with math, and it was great. So one of the questions was, what is the most valuable thing I learned about language learners and my field experience, and why? So the biggest thing that I learned is patience. These kids, they're not only just, they're so little, first of all. And so when you get upset with them, then they take it personally, of course, because they're little and they don't understand. But I learned patience because I remember growing up, I was placed into a dual language academy, and I was learning English and Spanish at the same time, and it was hard. It was really hard. I actually learned Spanish really well, and English. I learned English and Spanish good on the same level. My little sister, she actually didn't. She learned Spanish a lot more quickly than she did English. And so, but I was also in a dual language academy, so we were learning both the languages. These kids are learning straight English. And I think that's like what's hard to understand. They're thrown into this classroom, and the only thing that they've ever heard is Spanish, or, you know, their native language. Most of these kids were native Spanish speakers. So at home, they hear Spanish all the time. Being in a dual language academy, I was at home speaking English, but my mom was practicing Spanish with me because it was part of my everyday school experience. The kids, I learned that if I spoke to them in Spanish, then they were a lot more willing to talk to me and to get done what I'm asking them to get done. With English language learners, it's hard. It's hard learning a second language, and I think that sometimes people forget that, especially being young and you know, being molded in this, you know, I guess, country. You would think that, you know, they'd hear English everywhere, and so they should be able to learn it pretty quickly. But no, it's still pretty difficult for them. And so I would sit with them and I would talk to them in Spanish sometimes and ask them, you know, what are you thinking? What? And then I would have them talk to me back into English. And some people would think that, you know, that would be hard for them, but I felt like they were more willing to talk to me and to say, no, this, you know, this is really hard. And we'd go through it more slow, and we would talk about it. And for instance, with the sight words, one little girl named Emily, she would say, "Oh, this is so hard. This is so hard," in Spanish, and I would say, "No, it's, you know, let's do it slow. We can do it slow." It's all in Spanish, and she was willing to work with me, and I really liked that. She was one of the girls that I was with a lot of the time, and I really enjoyed being around her. So what is the most valuable thing that I have learned about teaching language learners in my field experience, and why? Again, with teaching them, I guess it's kind of the same answer. You have to realize that if they're not progressing, then you need to step back and be like, whoa, okay, hold on. You know, what did we skip? What did we go over too quickly? What do we need to go back to? Do we need to go back to sounding out? Because with sight words, a lot of the times kids just memorize them. And I think that it's important for them to be able to know, you know, what the word actually means. And so definitely knowing when to go back, and knowing when it's important to reverse and think through, process thinking, and trying to figure out what's going to be best for them. And I am lucky that I am bilingual, because I was able to figure out what this little girl is thinking and why she's not, you know, doing things when I'm asking her to do them, and then she was able to explain it to me in a way that she probably wouldn't have been able to explain it to me in English. And so with teaching, patience, you know, and repetition, and just it was a great experience for me, because I don't have a lot of patience, even though I'm trying to be a teacher. And so it was great for me to sit with her and go through the process of, you know, everything with her. This little girl, Emily, that I keep talking about. So a connection between one event or practice that I observed in my field experience and topic that we covered in the course was, so with Spanish speakers, they flip words. It's different. So their adjectives and their nouns are flipped. It depends on what they're trying to say. And so that was one of the biggest things. It was really interesting because they'd flip words all the time. Or another one was their tense, their verb tense. They would say things like, he say this to me and it wasn't very nice, rather than he said this. Or another example is, well, I guess, I mean, I can't think off the top of my head of what they would say, but definitely verb tense and the flipping of words, because in Spanish, again, the adjective and the noun are flipped sometimes depending on what the person is trying to say. And so those are two of the biggest things that were a connection in the classroom and in our class. And so being able to understand why these kids are saying things in the wrong way. And again, like I said, so when I would work with these students, I would take a native English speaker first, and then I would take a English language learner second, and I was able to see the difference. I was able to see, and there's a huge difference, and I never really thought about it. So it was amazing for me because with the native English speaker, one of the little girls, she could go through sight words like flying colors, no problem. And when I would talk to her, even her sentences, when I would say, okay, this is the word, here's my sentence, what is your sentence? I want you to come up with a sentence now. Her sentences, she would use words that the English language learners probably had no idea. And her sentences weren't loaded. They weren't run-ons. Some of the little kids who are English language learners, they would have loaded sentences, and they would say things that, you know, I would say a sentence like, if the word was what, I would say, what is my sister wearing today? And they would start the sentence, what is my sister? And then they would say the rest, but then they'd go on and on and on, add on to the sentence, and I'm sitting there like, it was just so interesting. And I feel like they did that because they wanted to be right, or they wanted to sound smarter, when it really didn't need to be that way. So one of the little English native English speakers that I worked with, she again would use words that an English language learner probably wouldn't have even thought of using, and her sentences weren't loaded. So when I would work with the English language learners, I would say, oh, you know, good job, but let's stick with one sentence, because then they would do a run-on sentence, or they'd, you know, give me a sentence that didn't even have the sight word in it. It was awesome. It was great to be in the classroom. So what I'm going to take away from this is, in my own classroom, again, I said this twice, but patience, being so patient and understanding that they're learning two languages. They have things going through their head in two different languages, and they're constantly having to switch half the day in, you know, English and half the day in Spanish, or most of their life in Spanish, and then for a little while English. You know, it's just, I'm sure all of their family members speak Spanish, and so understanding that it's a process, it's not easy, and that we need to not get down on them for, you know, not being able to say things, but encouraging them. And I guess when I said that, you know, their sentences were kind of loaded, maybe it could be a good thing that they're trying to, you know, they're trying to learn. And so I don't know. And then again, knowing when to go back, knowing when we need to review, knowing when we need to repeat something, knowing when, okay, the student isn't progressing. What do we need to do to make sure that they're on the same same level as everyone else, and making sure that they're moving at the same pace. So yeah, that's about it. Thanks, guys.